When you see Tom Hanks on screen, you see America's dad. You see the guy who made us cry in Forrest Gump, who made us believe in friendship through Toy Story, and who showed us what real courage looks like in Saving Private Ryan. But behind that warm smile and those kind eyes lies a story so heartbreaking, it might change how you see this beloved actor forever. At 69 years old, Tom Hanks is facing battles that no amount of fame or fortune can fix. And if you've ever been touched by one of his movies, you need to hear this story. Tom's journey didn't start in Hollywood glamour. It began in a tiny town in California where a little boy learned what it meant to feel invisible. Born on July 9, 1956, in Concord, California, Tom came into a world that seemed determined to teach him that nothing lasts forever. His dad, Amos, worked as a cook, moving from job to job, barely making enough money to keep food on the table. His mom, Janet, struggled just to find her place in the world. But the real tragedy started when Tom was just 4 years old. In 1960, his parents got divorced. Not in some big dramatic fight like you see in movies, but in a cold, quiet way that somehow felt even worse. The family split apart like a broken puzzle. Tom went with his dad, along with 2 of his siblings, while his youngest brother stayed with their mom. Just like that, the only world Tom knew was gone. What happened next would shape the rest of Tom's life in ways that still hurt him today. Between the ages of 4 and 10, Tom lived in 10 different houses. Think about that for a moment. 10 different houses in 6 years. That means he never got to call anywhere home. He slept in beds that weren't his, ate at tables where he felt like a guest, and went to schools where he was always the new kid, always the outsider. The houses were small and cramped, with peeling paint and the smell of other people's lives still lingering in the corners. Tom wore the same clothes until they fell apart. He learned to be grateful for whatever space he was given and became really good at staying out of everyone's way. He once said, "I was a geek, an outsider." But those simple words hide a much deeper pain. He had learned that asking for love or wanting to belong somewhere only led to disappointment. For Tom, home wasn't a place. It was just a suitcase that he carried from one temporary stop to the next. But in all that moving around and feeling lost, there was one place where Tom felt like he mattered. The stage. In dusty school auditoriums under buzzing lights. He could become someone else. Someone people actually listened to. Someone who got applause instead of silence. That applause wasn't just sound to Tom. It was like oxygen to someone who had been holding his breath for years. But every time the show ended, the curtain came down, and he had to go back to another strange room, another bed that wasn't really his. Looking back decades later, Tom described his childhood with one word that breaks your heart when you think about it. Lonely. This is the man who would grow up to become the face of love and connection on movie screens around the world. And yet, his own childhood was defined by loneliness. But even in those dark, uncertain years, something beautiful was being born. Tom made a promise to himself. If he ever found his voice, if he ever got the chance to be heard, he would use it to make other people feel seen. He would protect them from the same invisible feeling that had shaped his entire young life. When Tom turned 21, he thought his struggles might be over. But growing up just brought a different kind of loneliness. In 1977, with nothing but a beat-up suitcase, an old typewriter, and hope that was hanging by a thread, Tom got on a bus to New York City. He thought it would be magical like in the postcards. Instead, he found a city that didn't care if he disappeared tomorrow. The rent was sky-high. The rooms were tiny. The nights were colder than he had ever imagined. Tom shared cramped apartments with strangers, sometimes sleeping on floors, sometimes on couches, often wondering if this was how dreams came true or how they died. His pockets were almost always empty. He ate whatever he could buy with loose change. Casting calls were his only hope, but most of them ended the same way. Silence. In interviews years later, Tom would remember walking out of auditions feeling like the casting directors didn't see a leading man. They just saw a skinny kid with a funny voice who didn't have the edge that Hollywood was looking for. In a business that rewarded being tough and cool, Tom's kindness almost seemed like a weakness. He once said quietly, I learned early on that the room didn't need me. And that's a hard thing to carry home at night. But here's what makes Tom Hanks special. The rejection didn't break him. Carved him into something stronger. He took every job, no matter how small or embarrassing. Tiny parts in plays that nobody saw. Low-budget horror movies that barely paid enough for rent. He even worked as a stagehand, building sets and sweeping floors just to stay close to the world of acting. Tom later said, "Those years taught me everything. You show up, you work, and you keep going, even if no one notices." By 1980, when he was 24, his determination finally paid off a little. He got a role in a weird sitcom called Bosom Buddies, where he had to dress up like a woman just so his character could get an apartment. It was silly and didn't last long, but for Tom, it was like finding a crack in a wall he'd been pounding on for years. Even then, the fear never left him. Every time a job ended, he was terrified the dream would disappear and he'd be back on that bus with his suitcase, going nowhere. Tom has admitted that those early years weren't about chasing success. They were about survival. He didn't have a backup plan. He just knew he couldn't go back to feeling invisible. Then something incredible happened. The world discovered Tom Hanks. From the sweet wonder of Big to the powerful honesty of Philadelphia. From the unforgettable story of Forrest Gump to the lonely struggle of Cast Away. Each movie seemed to lift him higher and higher. But what the cameras couldn't show was the price he paid for every role. For Philadelphia, Tom lost 35 pounds to play a man dying of AIDS. But the weight loss wasn't just physical. It seemed to come off his spirit too, leaving a chill that stayed with him long after filming ended. When he made Forrest Gump, he made a brave decision. Instead of taking a safe $7 million salary, he chose to get paid based on how much money the movie made. It was brilliant and earned him more than $70 million. But it also turned every bit of praise into pressure. Every new movie became a test he felt he had to pass. In Saving Private Ryan, Tom had to carry the trauma of war with respect and dignity. The days ended with a tiredness that felt deeper than physical exhaustion. It was the kind of tired that teaches you humility instead of pride. For Cast Away, the production actually stopped filming so Tom's body could change to look like a man who had been stranded alone on an island. Those months of near silence carved a loneliness that took a long time to lift. Because when you act isolated on screen, sometimes that isolation follows you home. While audiences saw triumphs, Tom lived with the cost. Fame didn't give him rest. Just ask for more. More movies, more interviews, more expectations to remain America's gentle, perfect guy. The quiet rooms felt heavier than the crowded movie premieres. Sometimes Tom described being at the peak of success as feeling like standing in a beautiful room whose door was softly locked. Success could comfort him and trap him at the same time. There were nights when he wondered who he was when the cameras weren't rolling. When the kind eyes that people loved were simply tired. But he kept faith with his craft, always reading, always preparing, always choosing to honor real people and real feelings instead of just chasing money and fame. In quiet moments, he admitted that only a few of his many movies felt truly complete by his own standards. It was a hard way to judge himself, but it kept his work pointed toward helping others instead of just feeding his own ego. That's why Tom's success never became a place to rest. It was a narrow line he had to walk carefully every day, turning pressure into purpose and fame into responsibility. He wanted to make sure that someone leaving the movie theater might feel a little less alone in the world. But even with all the success and awards, Tom still carried a quiet hurt from long ago that no trophy could heal. Before the world called him beloved, he had been a scared young man reaching for safety in the arms of a woman he hoped could fill the emptiness his broken childhood had left behind. His first marriage to Samantha Lewis wasn't built on being ready for marriage. It was built on loneliness. Haunted by his own family falling apart, Tom believed that love and marriage might save him from repeating the same painful pattern. But being young and desperate isn't a strong foundation for a life together. At 21, Tom became a husband and soon a father, knowing deep down that he wasn't prepared for the responsibility and heartache that was coming. He would later look back and realize that at such a young age, He had confused fear with being ready and loneliness with love. It was a heartbreaking mistake that would cause him years of quiet regret. As his acting career demanded more and more of his time, the problems in his marriage grew bigger. Samantha, who was gentle but struggling, got left behind as Tom's life moved too fast for her to keep up. The love that had once promised to anchor him became another weight he couldn't carry. When they quietly divorced in 1987, it shattered Tom because it felt like more than just an ending. It felt like the beginning of a guilt that would follow him for years. He had sworn that the cycle of broken homes would stop with him. But now he watched his children Colin and Elizabeth live between two households, just like he once had. It was a bitter irony. Here was an actor celebrated for playing steadfast father figures, and he was wondering in private if he had failed his own kids. There were days when the applause on set felt hollow. After filming scenes about family, he would step into his trailer where nobody was waiting for him. Tom later admitted that the hardest sound was the quiet of a hotel room when he knew his children were hurting somewhere far away. The nights were heavy. Sometimes he would sit in his car instead of walking into an empty house, because success couldn't drown out the guilt. The quiet at home cut deeper than any bad review ever could. While the public saw a man at full strength, Tom saw a parent who had missed bedtime stories and school plays. He had missed the chance to say he was proud in the moments that mattered. He feared his children's silence more than any criticism from movie critics. There were evenings when his son would barely look at him, and every declaration of love Tom made on screen felt unsafe to trust in real life. The hardest truth of all was that Tom never stopped caring for Samantha. Not with the fire of first love, but with a steady sorrow that never went away. When illness later struck her in the form of bone cancer, Tom was there with his full help. He covered her treatment, visited often, sat by her hospital bed, and held her hand while memories of two young dreamers came flooding back. But he could only watch her decline. He couldn't repair what had broken between them years ago. He was no longer a husband, but he was still the boy who had once promised to protect her. Tom would confide that some failures live quietly in your heart, and the only answer is to keep showing up with kindness, even when kindness can't change the ending. This wasn't the stuff of headlines, but the real story of a man who tried, stumbled, and continued to carry the weight of those choices. While cameras recorded the rise of a legend, behind them stood a father asking if love by itself could ever be enough. Then, just when Tom believed he had found some peace, life tested him again. Not as an actor in front of cameras but as a partner, a husband, and a man who would be asked to stand strong in the darkness. His second marriage to actress Rita Wilson had been a steady light against all the odds of Hollywood. A love that grew not with noise and drama, but with patience. They met at work, learned about each other slowly, and fell in love deeply enough to hold both the bright days and the dark ones. In Rita, Tom found more than just a companion. He found someone whose spirit matched his own. Someone who understood the fears he rarely talked about, the regrets he carried quietly, and the soft sadnesses that never asked for attention but never quite went away either. They married in 1988, not long after the storm of his divorce had settled. Over the years, their bond was tested by difficulties but made stronger by ordinary, everyday love. To the public, they often looked like the perfect balance. Holding hands at movie premieres, sharing smiles at events, raising children in a home that seemed to carry peace even when work was stressful. But even the strongest love can be tested by fate. In 2015, Rita received a diagnosis that shook the ground under both of them and shattered the idea that anything in their world was unbreakable. Rita was diagnosed with breast cancer. The woman around whom Tom had built his life, his anchor and closest friend, suddenly had to fight for her own survival. She went through a double mastectomy with reconstructive surgery, a series of medical procedures that required courage every single hour and recovery that moved much slower than hope wanted it to. For the first time in decades, Tom couldn't protect the person he loved from what was hurting her. Scripts, fame, and fortune all fell silent before the only task that truly mattered. So he held her hand through doctor appointments, whispered strength when her body was weak, and cried in private because the fear of losing the person who had made him whole felt bigger than any stage could hold. Tom later shared in careful words that Rita had saved his life more times than he could count, and the least he could do was stay by her side and pray he wouldn't have to face a world without her. For that year, time itself seemed to slow down. Hollywood faded into the background, and home became a battleground fought with medicine, faith, and love instead of speeches and awards. They won that battle. Rita survived. But scars remained in ways both seen and unseen. With those scars came a quiet watchfulness that hid fear behind brave smiles. Because once you've been shaken like that, you never again mistake calm for certainty. Tom had been managing type 2 diabetes since 2013 with quiet discipline, and that single fact made the threat of any future illness feel like a sharper risk. They had won in 2015, and 5 years later, a different storm arrived with the same demand for courage. In 2020, as the world slid into uncertainty with the COVID-19 pandemic, Tom and Rita were among the first public figures to test positive for the virus while Tom was filming in Australia. The illness hit Rita hard. Her taste and smell disappeared. Exhaustion settled deep in her bones, and fever held on much longer than anyone wanted. For Tom, who was living with type 2 diabetes and was now 63 years old, the diagnosis felt like a life-threatening risk rather than just a passing scare. Suddenly, the man so often asked to play strong, resilient characters became a face of vulnerability in a crisis that belonged to everyone. Headlines and statistics turned into a drumbeat that sounded like a countdown to Tom and Rita. Tom was haunted not by rumors, but by the real possibility of leaving Rita behind or watching her watch him fade away. During those long nights far from home, he quietly wrote letters of goodbye, not in panic, but in serious preparation, just in case the unknown asked for more than courage could give. Once again they leaned on each other. In an isolated hospital room, their world shrank to 4 sterile walls and the presence that had always made them feel safe. Tom stayed strong not because fear was gone, but because Rita needed him to be. He kept a journal, sent messages of hope to people who were worried about them, and found small ways to make her smile when she could barely sit up. The illness did what hardship often does for people who truly love each other. It brought them closer together with the knowledge that no amount of fame can protect a heart from the reality of death. When recovery came, it brought gratitude along with lasting changes. Tom felt different in ways that wouldn't go away. His body, already challenged by years of diabetes, didn't bounce back like it used to. Simple walks left him out of breath. His joints ached, and tiredness lingered long after the calendar said he should be better. He put on a brave face in public and kept his old charm for others, while carrying new private questions about work, about becoming a burden, about whether a man who had played heroes would now need help going up the stairs. Even so, they came through it together, tired, shaken, but more deeply connected than before. In a moment of rare openness, Tom said that when two people walk through fire together, there's very little left to fear, because closeness forged by trial breathes with a single heart. Their love was never a scripted fantasy. It was messy where life is messy, tested where life is harsh, and refined by years of pain endured side by side. That's why it lasted when weaker bonds would have given up. Through breast cancer, through COVID, through chronic illness, through loss and fame and uncertainty, Tom and Rita held on not because it was easy, but because they understood exactly what it means to lose everything. And that knowledge made their love sharper and stronger instead of wearing it down. But perhaps the hardest test of Tom Hanks didn't happen on a movie set or a stage. It happened the day a father realized his son was slipping beyond his reach. To the world, Tom was the symbol of dignity, humility, and warmth. Many people called him America's dad. But no amount of public love can soften the pain of watching your own child lose their way. Chet, born into opportunity and privilege, stepped onto a path that drifted away from the legacy his parents had built with compassion, decency, and hard work. The road soon filled with rebellion, serious substance abuse, and public controversies that turned private worry into public embarrassment. For Tom, who had spent his whole life trying to break free from the chaos of his own childhood, watching his son's struggle felt like history knocking at a door he had promised to keep closed forever. In 2015, Tom supported Chet quietly through rehab, like any loving father grasping for any rope that might help his child. But recovery is a long road, not a magic switch. The headlines didn't stop. There were angry outbursts, controversial posts on social media, and a lawsuit tied to a car accident involving a vehicle registered to Tom and Rita. Reports suggested that Chet asked the other driver not to call the police, which raised questions about whether he was under the influence and dragged Tom and Rita into legal trouble they didn't cause. For Tom, these weren't just scandals to read about in the news. They were wounds that cut deep into his heart. He had avoided controversy for decades and stood for integrity in a business that often rewards the opposite. Now his son's name was connected to words like lawsuit, addiction, and public ridicule. It turned a father's pain from something about reputation into something about the soul. Chet later called himself the black sheep of the family, a label Tom never used but perhaps quietly feared was true. The questions that torture any devoted parent wouldn't let Tom rest. Had success blinded him to his son's pain? Had the legacy he built become a pressure that hurt instead of helped? Had he been so focused on his career that he missed the signs that his child was struggling? Still, Tom didn't turn away. He didn't disown his son. He didn't pretend nothing was wrong or get angry in public. He stayed quiet and present because that's how love stands when it hurts. In late-night moments when the phone feels heavier than the hand holding it and the air seems colder than any spotlight, Tom wrestled with guilt and helplessness that no shelf of awards could make better. Maybe he recognized echoes of his own past in his son's struggles. The instability, the loneliness, the long ache for belonging that fame can never grant. In time, Chet has claimed sobriety and has talked about how hard it was growing up in the shadow of such a famous father. Scars remain though, and for Tom, they confirm a hard truth that many parents know by heart. Love cannot always save your child, but it must never stop trying. This wasn't a role with lines to memorize or marks to hit on a stage. This was life without a script, where the stakes weren't about winning awards but about saving souls. While audiences kept their hero on movie screens, behind the scenes stood a father who was heartbroken, hopeful, and holding on with everything he had. Even in the later years of an extraordinary career, Tom Hanks carries the quiet echo of hurts that fame can never erase. Beyond childhood wounds, public family struggles, and life-threatening health scares, he still meets each day with burdens too personal to trend on social media. Burdens that hide behind a practiced calm that looks like strength to the outside world. As Tom moves through his late 60s and into the years ahead, time itself adds weight to every step. The daily work of living with type 2 diabetes grows more demanding, with stricter routines, tighter discipline, and recoveries that take longer than they used to. Diagnosed in 2013, this chronic condition requires constant attention and the anxious knowledge that a single careless choice can upset everything. It's a cruel twist of fate that the man who once reshaped his body for Castaway and Philadelphia now fights an invisible battle that cameras will never show. While age makes each struggle feel heavier, the public sees a charming elder statesman. But they don't see the needles, the carefully planned meals, the private exhaustion of managing a disease with no finish line. They don't see the small victories won by inches when muscles tire faster and energy takes longer to return. There's also the isolation that shadows great success. Respect can become a lonely crown. At the peak of achievement, Tom has admitted to feeling adrift, surrounded by people yet anchored by no one. He returns to hotel rooms after standing ovations and asks in the stillness what remains when the applause fades. It's a kind of devastation that doesn't arrive with drama but with whispers that wear down the soul more with each passing year. The perfectionism that lifted Tom up can also grind him down. He has spoken about self-doubt that questions every line he delivers, second-guessing missed moments or misread emotions. There's a fear more stubborn than any bad review. The fear of not being enough. Now, of being cherished for yesterday while today slips from his grasp as stamina must be guarded more carefully than ever. Perhaps the sharpest pain doesn't come from his own struggles, but from the shadow of repetition he tried so hard to outrun. Despite all his work to give his children stability and love, he has watched old fears take new shapes. Colin has built a respectable career but is often measured against his father's massive shadow. Chet has struggled with addiction and unpredictable public behavior that makes headlines for all the wrong reasons. Tom has carried the guilt of being unable to protect his children completely, especially from the broken pieces of himself that he fought so hard to mend. He worries that they might feel as fractured as he once did, that the very success meant to give them security might have given them pressure instead. His kindness, the virtue the world celebrates most about him, rises directly from those old wounds. He knows what it feels like to be unseen and left behind, so he gives time, resources, and attention to strangers and causes that need help. But even generosity can take a quiet toll. A man who keeps giving may forget to keep a space where his own healing can breathe, especially as the years ask for gentler pacing. And so Tom Hanks, the smiling landmark of countless beloved films, continues to shoulder battles that aren't explosive or scandalous, but subtle, slow, and deeply human. He moves through them with grace, asking for no pity and rarely showing the weight he carries. But if you look past the applause and red carpets, you'll see a life shaped not only by triumphs but by private losses borne with steady courage as age and illness press harder. This too is Tom Hanks's story. And perhaps it's the truest part of all. The man who carried so many stories on screen now keeps one simple truth for himself. That peace isn't a prize you win, but a practice you honor every single day. Today, Tom Hanks moves through days that on the surface radiate steadiness, comfort, and a quiet dignity earned the hardest way possible. At 69, he keeps his center in a peaceful, sun-drenched home in Pacific Palisades, Los Angeles. It's a 14,000-square-foot sanctuary that reportedly cost $26 million, with thoughtful lines of limestone and towering glass that opens to a resort-style pool where calm isn't consumed but truly savored. His peace doesn't end in California. Across the sea, on the Greek island of Antiparos, stands a stone retreat where time slows under olive shade and salt breezes carry stories of survival. It's a place where Tom and Rita return each summer to reconnect with simplicity, nature, and each other, far from the noise of Hollywood. Their marriage remains one of the most lasting in Hollywood, a bond carved not by convenience but by storms weathered together, illness faced head-on, and devotion that doesn't blink when times get tough. With Rita, who survived both breast cancer and COVID-19, serving as his co-pilot, muse, and mirror, Tom has found something rare in his world. As a father, he remains closely present for all his children: Colin, Elizabeth, Chet, and Truman. He watches not as a judge but as a compass, proud of Colin's steady work, respectful of Elizabeth's privacy, mindful of the very public paths that Chet and Truman have chosen, and quietly hopeful as a more mature and sober Chet works to keep moving forward. Financially, Tom stands among Hollywood's wealthiest, with an estimated net worth of roughly $400 million. While his life-changing share from Forrest Gump reportedly brought in more than $70 million, that figure is just one chapter in a larger story of careful investing in historic homes, coastal retreats, and even a nostalgic Bay Area houseboat that once gave him shelter in his youth. He treats wealth as a tool rather than a trophy. Giving back remains central to who Tom is. From supporting cancer research and helping the homeless to funding arts education, he and Rita give quietly to hospitals, schools, and organizations dedicated to dignity and opportunity. Their help arrives not as a show but as presence. Quiet, consistent, and humble. His approach to work has changed too. Tom no longer chases roles or courts attention. Instead, he chooses projects with emotional or cultural weight, like A Man Called Otto, or continues collaborations with Steven Spielberg. He's also become a welcomed voice on podcasts and a thoughtful writer of essays and short stories about history, character, and what it means to be human. Perhaps the clearest sign of Tom's life now is the calm it carries. Not the absence of pain but the presence of perspective. He walks with measured steps, jokes with fans, takes long walks beside Rita, and still drives himself through Los Angeles traffic in a mix of vintage or electric cars. There are no grand announcements and no fancy displays. Only a man who has learned deliberately and gratefully what truly lasts. He understands that his current peace isn't a reward for being famous, but a choice made after decades of noise and chaos. In that choice lives perhaps the most meaningful story he has ever told. Not one written in scripts or framed on a movie screen, but one lived moment by tender moment with grace. It's there that his hard-won serenity becomes its own kind of victory. What stays with you most about Tom Hanks isn't a shelf full of awards, but a steady way of being that makes everyone around him feel more dignified. He treats kindness like a discipline and decency like daily work, proving that character can be deliberate, repeatable, and reliable even when nobody is watching. He shows that integrity can stay quiet and still change a room, because listening with your full attention often carries more power than speaking with a louder voice. His influence is measured not only in unforgettable movie roles but in the calmer hearts and better days of the people who have worked beside him and the audiences who have leaned on his stories when life got hard. Tom has walked through tremendous pain without turning it into a spectacle for attention. He has carried success without mistaking applause for purpose, holding both triumph and struggle with a humility that helps steady others. He reminds us that greatness is less about one shining moment and more about daily habits, less about headlines and more about choices renewed each morning to do the next right thing. His generosity comes without fanfare because the point isn't getting attention but making an impact. The work is to leave people feeling safer, more seen, and more possible than they were before. Tom has turned empathy into a craft, patience into a promise, and responsibility into a form of grace that doesn't fade when the cameras stop rolling. He proves that scars can become maps rather than walls, that second chances are worth the hard work, and that hope isn't naive when it's practiced with discipline and determination. In a noisy world that often rewards the loudest voice, Tom offers the reassurance that steadiness still moves mountains. That gentle courage, repeated over time, can be a quiet revolution. That choosing kindness, day after day, year after year, can change not just your own life but the lives of everyone you touch. If Tom Hanks's work has ever steadied you, if a scene or a single line from one of his movies once found you in a difficult hour and reminded you that you weren't alone, then you understand why his story matters. Not just as entertainment, but as proof that goodness is still possible and still worth choosing again and again every single day. This is the real Tom Hanks. Not perfect but persistent. Not without pain but never without hope. A man who took a childhood of loneliness and loss and turned it into a lifetime of making others feel less alone. That's not just a Hollywood story. That's a human story. And it's one worth remembering. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button to show your support for Tom Hanks and everything he represents. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that kindness still matters in this world. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories about the real people behind the Hollywood magic. Because sometimes, the most important stories are the ones that happen when the cameras stop rolling and real life begins.